up here, and I do not expect you to be able to read all this because it's a little bit of, it's pretty detailed. But I think the first thing I want to point your attention to is I laid this out so that it looks like a maze and a game board, right, for a specific reason. Because right now, there are over 12 million undocumented people, right, persons in America. And within that number, there are about 700,000 DACA recipients, right? But within that other, within that number, there's 700,000 DACA recipients, and there are about 2.9 million dreamers who don't qualify for DACA, right? And so just to make sure we're all clear on what a dreamer is it's basically a child who came to the United States with, on average, the age of 6 years old, right? And came with a parent or relative to the US and has been in the US and went to school in the US and is, lost status for whatever reason or never had status, right? So there are about 2.9 million dreamers who don't qualify for DACA. I was one of them. Okay, and then within that 12 million number, there are also stateless individuals, right? And so I was also stateless. A stateless person, in a nutshell, is someone who literally does not have a country, right? There are different reasons why a person could be stateless. My reason, I'll explain in a minute, but I'll give you an example of one that's pretty common these days. So there is right now in Dominican Republic, I know that there are efforts to trace back, if a person's ancestry can be traced back to Haiti, they may or may not, they're subject to losing their nationality even if they were born in Dominican Republic, right? So let's say you're born in Dominican Republic, you trace your nationality back, your generation back to Haiti, you lose your citizenship, right? Your rights to Dominican Republic. So now you're no longer a citizen of Dominican Republic, you're not a citizen of Haiti, you're not a citizen of any country. So what happens to you? That's an example. There are a myriad of examples that are happening across the globe, some due to climate change, what have you. There are about 12 million stateless people in the world. So the reason I created this maze and this game board is because when I talk to those individuals and I go to conversations or I mention them, they ask me, Martine, how did you get from where you started to where you are today? And I don't have a prescription because the whole space within the immigration courts is pretty complicated and it's somewhat convoluted. So I can't tell them if you do A, B, and C, if you do exactly what I do, you'll have the same outcome, right? It's as random now as a roll of the dice. And so ultimately, that's why it's like a game, right? You just roll the dice and you don't know what's gonna happen. So let me tell you my story. I came to the US, I was born in Zambia, in Africa, and my family, my mother and father, were from DR Congo. And I came to the United States when I was 4 years old. I came with my mother, and shortly thereafter she remarried. She married my stepfather, who was American born. I had a relatively normal childhood. I lived in Silver Spring, Maryland for most of my childhood, and then moved to, I saw a hand up, you're from Silver Spring, woohoo, okay. And then moved to Ohio, and that's when life took a turn. For the worse, the first shoe fell. First shoe dropped when my stepfather died when I was 13. And then a year and a half later, the second shoe dropped when my mother died when I was 15. And so in that moment, I became an orphan. I did have family, my mother's family, who took me in. Unfortunately, I experienced abuse, neglect, and in a household where I didn't experience abuse and or neglect, those individuals were just complacent to what was happening, right? And so ultimately I was tossed. I think I moved from, in a matter of 1 year, I went to 3 high schools in 3 states. So that was not the ideal way to grow up. And I was really downtrodden at the time. And I was working in my aunt's consignment shop. She decided to take me out of school when I was 16 years old so I could work for her, breaking all child labor laws. And then a stranger came in to that consignment shop. I can still remember it as if it was yesterday. And she asked me one question that changed the entire trajectory of my life. Can you imagine, like, what would be that one question that someone could pose to you that could change your entire life? Just think about it. I'm not gonna tell you what that one question is, because that's my plug for you to read my book, right? But that one question changed my entire life. So shortly thereafter, my life just sort of changed immediately. I ended up in boarding school, and the unfortunate part, or the challenging part, was that boarding school didn't have money for me to continue. I didn't have enough scholarship money. So a judge decided to act as my benefactor. And I went to boarding school, graduated from boarding school. Life was pretty good at the time, it was okay, I was surviving, and got into college, and I got a private scholarship, and went to Hamilton College, if anyone's ever heard of Hamilton College. Good, I see some hands up, woo-hoo. Hamilton College, and then eventually went to graduate school at Syracuse University to get my master's in public administration, focusing on immigration law. But it was during my time at Hamilton where, again, if there was another shoe, it definitely dropped. So freshman year, I was working in the Dean of Faculty's office, just trying to make ends meet, and had a social security card, just like anyone else who enters the US. I entered as a visitor, and then my mother and I entered as visitors, so we got social security cards. Mine said non-working on it. So we needed to adjust it because I was working. So we just needed to go to the Social Security Administration, right, and just change it. And it was through our own ignorance, the ignorance of me and college administrators, where we literally walked into Social Security Administration. A lot of paperwork was done. I remember the individual, the woman who was going through my paperwork, asked me a few questions, and I responded, and she said, "Oh, you don't sound like the rest of them." I didn't even know what that meant. Unconscious bias? Maybe not so unconscious, right? And then immediately I was placed in removal proceedings. At the time, it was referred to as deportation proceedings. Now we use nice, better euphemisms. We say removal proceedings, it sounds better. We say undocumented now, which is so much better than being referred to as illegal, because I was illegal at the time, right? So was placed in removal proceedings, and my case was redirected to a court in Buffalo. And so through those, I spent 7 years in removal proceedings, literally fighting for my life. Now, what was I fighting for? I was fighting not only to stay in the US, but I was fighting to not be placed in a detention facility indefinitely, right? Because people like me, people who are undocumented, but also stateless, right? They don't have a country to go to. They don't know what to do with people like us. How was I stateless? Well, I'll tell you. Remember I said I was born in Zambia? Born in Zambia. I left Zambia when I was like 2 years old. So I needed to, according to the Constitution, I needed to claim citizenship before I was 18. I'm not sure how I would have known that. But I did do it, so I was considered a citizen. And I also mentioned that my mother and father are from DR Congo. Well, you might be thinking, hey, maybe you could have claimed citizenship there. Even though I wouldn't want to claim citizenship there if I could. It's not the safest place. But anyway, I tried. But because, again, their constitution changed. Congo was originally Zaire, changed to Congo, DR Congo. And because of that, if I could have claimed citizenship, I didn't at the time, so I lost even the possibility of becoming a citizen. And also because my mother and father, my mother was dead, and my biological father, I thought was dead, I didn't have anyone to apply for citizenship for me. Make sense? So I actually didn't have citizenship of Congo, of Zambia, nor the US. So the judge was on I will say this word, this vendetta, right? He wanted to annihilate me. I really, really believe that. I remember vividly in the courtroom him saying, "You're a horrible human being. You deserve to be deported," okay? And he said this because I went through a series of 6 attorneys in the 7 years that I was going through my journey. And throughout those, and I experienced a lot of malpractice with many of the attorneys I work with. I remember some suggesting that I just get married. By the way, that doesn't work. I know it's glamorized in Hollywood that this is a great way to adjust your status. It doesn't necessarily work, but it was very reductive. It reduced my experience, right? And so the main attorney I had definitely committed a lot of malpractice, introduced evidence in the courtroom in the 11th hour, so it angered the judge. He thought I was a liar, and he really wanted to teach me a lesson, right? So when I also say that I was undocumented and stateless, I would actually equate it, or the analogy would be, if being undocumented is being in a nightmare, which it is, being stateless is like being trapped in a nightmare. There's no way out, absolutely no way out. So what was so tormenting about that experience and excruciating was because I had to live this double life of being a normal student, going to school, trying to survive, trying to figure out how I was going to feed myself, all of those things. At the same time, I'm fighting for my life and fearful that I will end up in a detention facility indefinitely because there's no place else that they're going to send me, unless there's a third country. There isn't a third country that's just going to take somebody in. The irony of that is that they considered Mexico as a third country to send me to, but obviously that wasn't a real possibility. So I spent 7 years going in and out of courtrooms, presenting evidence, having the judge tell me that it was, useless, telling me that I was a horrible person, trying to balance that with going to school, feeling like a fugitive because this was also around 9/11, so wanting to kind of be invisible, but also suffering from feeling invisible. I needed to stay under the radar, so I didn't have a driver's license, I didn't have an ID. The irony of this, I like to tell this story. I think maybe some of you might appreciate this, dating back to your years of being under 21. I remember I did a program in New York City, an internship program here, right after 9/11, down right in Battery Park City. And I was technically 21 at the time, but I didn't have an ID. And so a couple of friends of mine suggested that it would be a great idea if we got fake IDs. So got a fake ID and tried to go into a club, got turned down because obviously it was fake, and I thought, how ironic, right? Just think about the irony of that. I actually was 21, but I couldn't actually prove that I was 21, so I used a fake ID and it didn't work. So I got turned down from going into a club. But ultimately, so that was my experience. It was a catch-22, and the fear was always, what's going to happen to me? When's the other shoe going to drop? When am I going to get deported? What does that mean? How do I stay under the radar? And also, how do I survive at the same time? My case went to the highest immigration court the first time. They're equivalent to like the Supreme Court of Immigration, the Board of Immigration Appeals. The first time, they remanded it back to the judge to review my case again. The judge was adamant that I needed to be deported, get rid of her. Sent it back to the Board of Immigration Appeals. And the second time, the unthinkable happened, right? To this day, I have immigration attorneys who ask me how that happened. Was that a fluke? It's like a miracle that the Board of Immigration Appeals, right? They're known for having backlog. There are over 700,000 cases that are immigration cases that are in the pipeline, that are backlogged, right? They looked at my case, they reviewed it, they gave a 6-page response as to why I deserved to be in the United States and have permanent residency, a green card. And they forced the judge who was overseeing my case to grant me a green card. So his hands were tied, and that's how it all happened. So that is so that's how I got from there, the first grade, to the last grade in 2012. Now, I want to highlight, I think it's really important for me